This piece is titled Waiting on Jesus, and it almost became a piece of canvas art. However, I was compelled to do something a bit more graphic, in your face. And this is what I brought to fruition. But here you have an individual skeleton that represents perhaps a father who was a preacher, maybe grandparents, or maybe that praying mother, praying auntie. These skeleton heads over here, these skulls represent children, nephews, loved ones. This represents marriage, and then tithe and offering, something that we give the moment we join a church. Even if we visit a church, we expected to give. But having grown up in the South, I was, raised to believe in the hope of Jesus Christ. And I can recall getting in trouble as a teenager. And, of course, you were convinced it was serious trouble. You were convinced to take it to Jesus, And at this point, I was there. I had been through a lot. I had had school attendance, issues with that. I had classmates die of violent crimes. Some had died of natural causes. At one point, I was, really depressed as a teenager, especially having been bullied as well as sexually abused. So there was a lot on my plate, even as a teenager. And I said, I'm going to do this. So I said what they call the sinner's prayer. I believe with my heart unto righteousness, and I confessed that Jesus did come to die for me and was raised on the third day. And that supposedly granted me salvation. All I had to do now was live up to that. And I was one, as I mentioned in the past, when I looked at the word scriptures, I looked at the word script as the base. If Matthew the 5th chapter told me to pray for those that despitefully use me, I did that. I had to become Matthew 5, become the script, fulfilling it. I can recall being in a situation where I was witnessing to a young lady I already knew she had a crush on me through one of my acquaintances. And while there sharing the word with her, she asked me, said, "So you really give up hip hop?" I said, "Yes." "You really give up movies with all the, curse words?" I said, "Yeah." "And you give up sex too?" She said, "Yeah." And of course we talked a little bit more, but she eventually got up, walked to the back of the house, came back with a condom, sat down on the sofa next to me, parted her legs. And in my mind, I said, well, I thought about 2 Corinthians 10, though we walk in the flesh, we do not war after the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. And I said within myself, well, I could entertain thoughts of what sex would be like with her, but I had to cast down those thoughts, those vain imaginations, and bring it into captivity, through Christ. And I was able to successfully walk out of that house because I didn't want to be a Christian behind closed doors, yet be out here in the streets witnessing other people. I didn't roll like that. So even in that sense, I had to become 2 Corinthians 10th chapter. I had to become the script. But it gets to a point when the people that you see who are dying, who are angry with life, and the very people praying for them are folks that are not into secular music. They're not caught up in an adulterous lifestyle. They could be pinpointed, work, home, church. And their prayers are not healing the sick. Guys are dying in their sin, in their shit. Even guys that I was praying for. And it just raises questions like, if you got a group of guys out, youth playing football, and they take a break, they all go to this Gatorade cooler, and they have these little cone cups, and they line up, and each one of them approach the Gatorade cooler, and they punch, and they get Gatorade. Well, let's say it's orange. One guy get up and say, "Man, this tastes like citrus orange." Another guy come through, "Man, this is good orange." They will all taste the same thing because they come in contact with the same cooler of Gatorade. Not one of them would pull off saying it was good grape, good cherry. It's not happening. And I couldn't understand how we as people had the same faith, same God, same book, but we were not rendering the same results. These miraculous acts that were so supposedly being performed in this book. So there was a lot of unanswered questions. But overall, for me to be out there and ushering people to church, telling my story, living the book, and then seeing what was going on around me, I began to doubt. And I can't tell you how many people that I've heard say, well, I'm going to give my nephew or my son or my daughter, my children, nieces and nephews to God. I'm just going to give them to God. And right now they're dead, incarcerated, they're angry as hell, they're homeless. I can't tell you how many people have boasted. What God has put together, let no man take his honor. This is our marriage. And within a year and a half, they're on the verge of divorcing. Sometimes earlier than that. And then here, you have the tithe and offering. Whether you join a church or not, if you fall off in the church, they want you to give. And none of that has brought change. I mean, you think, you get to a point where you raise questions and you ask, like, how can I commit myself to a God and be committed to him in a relationship, yet my marriage is broken? How could I be in a committed relationship with an all-seeing God, yet I don't have a relationship with my children because I've lost my son to gangs, I've lost my daughter to an abusive man, I've lost my daughter to the streets, I lost my nephew to drugs? How can you continue to stay in a committed relationship, being committed to somebody? That's the equivalence of right now. Like if your husband or your wife weren't committed to you and pulling their load, at some point you would question their love and you would divorce them. But it is something that I choose not to wrestle with anymore. The reality is, I had to come to the realization that in spite of what, my grandmother believed, or grandmothers, my mom believed, I just couldn't lay down and wake up knowing that I wasn't reaching my full potential because I lived in fear. And it really irks me when I hear people talk about, well, I'm just going to let go and let God. And what I'm seeing now happen is a lot of people are finding themselves in real situations in this real world, and they don't know how to function. They're angry, they're in fear. And to some degree, not always, but to some degree, that has come from that I'm going to let go and let God. I'm going to give it to God. And see, the reason why I'm still sane and can still function in certain climates is because I didn't continue to do that. Being in certain situations and utilizing your own mind as a means of rising above that, that gives wisdom and it gives experience. It also gives a dose of courage. But when you have lived a life, well, I'm just going to let go and let God, you fuck around and end up in some real situations and you don't know what to do because you haven't exercised wisdom, you don't have no experience. And now you have generations out here that are running mad. They experiment with drugs, self-mutilation, some just going on killing themselves. They into all kind of gang activity. Hip-hop and reality shows have more influence over your children and your favorite nieces and nephews than Jesus and you do, or Allah. So, I mean, it's a very confrontational piece, waiting on Jesus.